Mr. Sergeant of Arms, invite the members into the chamber and close the doors. I hereby declare the House of Representatives of the 113th General Assembly of the State of Tennessee now in session. Leader Lamberth, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to dispense with the calling of the roll.
Without objection, so ordered. Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I make a motion to take up calendar number 2.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Otherwise known as the appropriations calendar. I make a motion to take up the appropriations calendar at this time.
Heard the motion without objection, so ordered. Mr. Clerk. Call next bill.
House Bill 1545 by Chair Lady Hazelwood, Leader Lamberth, and others, relative to appropriations.
Chair Lady Hazelwood, okay, 2 minutes. Mr. Clerk, call up next bill.
Mr. Speaker, we are on House Bill 1545 of the appropriations calendar. House Bill 1545 by Chair Lady Hazelwood and others, relative to appropriations.
Chairlady Hazelwood, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1545 on third and final consideration.
Chairlady Hazelwood moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House Finance, Ways and Means Committee Amendment number 1.
Vice Chairman Baum, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Roll to the Hill.
Without objection, roll to the Hill. Next minute, Mr. Clerk.
House Finance, Ways and Means Committee Amendment number 2.
Vice Chairman Baum, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Roll to the Hill, please.
Without objection, roll to the Hill. Next minute, Mr. Clerk.
House Finance, Ways and Means Committee Amendment number 3.
Vice Chairman Baum, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to roll to the Hill.
Without objection, roll to the Hill. Next minute, Mr. Clerk.
House Amendment 4 by Representative Powell, Mr. Speaker, was timely filed.
Representative Powell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, a couple of weeks ago, we took a very unprecedented action that I think most people now recognize was a massive mistake. And want to remind the members that there is a cost also associated with the actions that this body took by expelling my colleague from Davidson County. Fortunately, the members of my Metro Council here in Nashville has acted swiftly and returned him to his seat. However, there will now have to be 2 special elections that will need to take place. The governor issued an order yesterday for this first special election, which will be June 15th. There is no other election that is going to coincide with that special election. As a result, that and then the following subsequent election, there will be a city election, so we can hold that at the same time. But this is going to cost the taxpayers of our state $120,000 at a minimum, and it could be more, just to hold this special election. And I want to remind members how many bills you might have stuck that didn't make it out from the budget that cost more, or cost less, than $120,000. That's real money. We took action, and it's going to cost the taxpayers of the state money to hold the special election. Now, I clearly was opposed, and I voted no on all 3 expulsion resolutions. I feel like we as a body did not adequately do justice, including looking at the financial ramifications that would create. Now, I see now that perhaps even there was a decision made and people signed, and before we even entered this body, to render a decision. And I took that, when I was on this floor, as that we were the jury and we had to listen to make a decision. But unfortunately now, I've heard that people made a commitment, they signed, they promised to do a certain thing. I can't imagine in the judicial system of the United States, any other place, before a jury enters that courtroom, that they would sign a verdict. Imagine that. That's what I have heard. And that is shocking to me that might have occurred in our body. And I hope that is not the case. But let's look at, it was referenced to U.S. Supreme Court, Bond versus Floyd. This was a U.S. Supreme Court that was unanimous, 9-0. Supreme Court ruled that in a Georgia case for a member who was disqualified from the Georgia legislature, that they had violated the First Amendment because of, this is the opinion of the court, in disqualifying Bond because of his statements, the state violated the First Amendment made applicable to states by the 14th Amendment. A majority of state legislators is not authorized to test the sincerity with which another duly elected legislator meets the requirements for holding office of swearing to support the federal and state constitutions. The state may not apply to a legislator a First Amendment standard stricter than that applicable to a private citizen, and that it cannot limit their capacity to express views on local or national policy. This was the United States Supreme Court. That was not referenced when we made that decision, but I wanted to bring this issue again to say that the taxpayers of the state of Tennessee are going to be left holding the bill. I am going to withdraw this amendment because the state will actually reimburse and pay for this, not the city of Nashville. But as a result, everyone in this room, your taxpayers, are going to be paying for the actions that you took. With that, I move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 4 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Amendment 5 by Representative Harris. Mr. Speaker, it was timely filed.
Representative Harris, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So members, we as a body have a responsibility to be fiscally responsible as a state when it comes to the dollars that come in that go out to our citizens. And so this amendment is in order for Shelby County to be reimbursed for the neglection and irresponsible decisions that we made as a body to send home 2 members who we end up bringing right back. I spoke with some of our commissioners back home, election commissioners back home, and on the January 24th and March 14th election for our member from District 86, that they had budgeted for it to be $1 million for that election. They came in just under $1 million for that election. The election administrator back home in Shelby County states that it's very possible that the next election, which will happen during the summer, will be somewhere around between $300,000 to $600,000 just for those 2 that are right before another election that we have 2 to 3 months following. This costs us a lot of money to do this, and this process of elections, knowing with knowledge that they will be sent right back here just to prove a point. And so I just like my colleague from Davidson County, understand that the state is going to be paying the locals for this, again, for this election. But I just wanted to make sure that a point was made that our taxpayers' dollars are in our hand for responsibility and that we do what we should properly with that. And I say that because yesterday we had a lot of bills that came behind the budget. One bill that was kind of important to me and a lot of members of my district, one of my constituents, Eliza Fletcher, died because we could have potentially caught that by rape cases, and the funds that we just spent on this election could have been utilized so that way we could expand our process in DNA testing. And so with that being said, I'm going to also move to withdraw this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection, amendment number 5 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Amendment 6 by Representative Powell. Mr. Speaker, it was timely filed.
Representative Powell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, many of us in this body have made a consistent effort to push for Medicaid expansion in the state of Tennessee. We've done that universally for all Tennesseans who would qualify. We've done that through other methods at looking at veterans, disabled veterans. And we tried multiple different ways to look at expanding Medicaid. This is money that we are, quite frankly, leaving and paying, but we are not accepting from the federal government. And the money is there, and it continues to be there. And this effort that I am putting forth is to deal with the gun violence the issue of gun violence that is plaguing the entire country and specifically this state. Gun violence injuries cost victims and their families more than $1 billion each year in initial direct medical costs alone. The Government Accountability Office found that each year firearm-related injuries cost $30,000 initial inpatient hospital stays. They cost an average of $31,000 each, and $50,000 initial emergency room visits that cost an average of $1,500 each, for a total annual cost of $1 billion. However, this is likely significantly higher because it doesn't include physician costs. For those who required initial hospital care and survived their injuries, up to 16% required readmits at least once in the first year post-injury, costing an additional $8,000 to $11,000 per patient. For victims of fatal firearm injuries, medical costs totaled $290 million in 2020 and cost an average of $9,000 per patient. Much of these costs are paid for by public health insurance providers such as Medicaid. Firearm injuries cost over 2 times more than other hospital care, according to the same similar study put forth by the U.S. Senate. And then if we look at some of the in-state costs, we know that gun violence costs Tennessee $18 billion each year, of which $415.5 million is paid by taxpayers. Tennessee has the 12th highest societal cost of gun violence in the U.S. at $2,633 per year per Tennessean. An average of 426 people in Tennessee die by gun homicide every year, a rate of 6.7 homicides per 100,000 people. Across all states, Tennessee has the 8th highest rate of gun homicides in the country. Of all homicides in Tennessee, 80% involve a gun, compared to 74% nationally. With over 400 million guns, the U.S. has 25 times the gun homicide rates of similarly developed countries. These countries share common problems such as mental illness, pandemic-related issues, crises, and hyper-partisan politics as well. Between 2011 and 2020, gun deaths skyrocketed 48% in Tennessee, homicides increased 103%, and suicides increased 20%. Tennessee now averages 1,273 gun deaths and 2,220 gun injuries annually, which is the leading cause of death among children and teenagers. Firearms are the first leading cause of death among children and teens in Tennessee. In Tennessee, an average of 105 children and teens die by guns every year, and 60% of these deaths are homicides. In the United States, 58% of all gun deaths among children and teens are homicides. Members, also want to remind you that the failure to expand Medicaid has contributed to the closure of multiple rural hospitals. We also rank 45th in the nation in access to mental health care. Taking on Medicaid expansion is an issue that no one in this room should abandon. I know it has been a very long and difficult session for many of us. But if we were to take on Medicaid expansion, we could do that today. We can do that in this budget. And if you think about those who are victims of gun violence, especially those who lack access to health care, passing this simple budget amendment would help relieve them of costs that they might bear for the remainder of their lives. Members, this is a chance for real reform. The people of Tennessee overwhelmingly support Medicaid expansion. We have seen that again and again. I would ask for the passage of this, and with that, I move adoption of my amendment.
Representative Powell moves adoption of amendment number 6. That's a proper motion, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Representative Todd, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to lay this on the table.
That's a proper motion, properly seconded. The parliamentary situation is Representative Powell has moved adoption of amendment number 6. Representative Todd has moved that motion to the table. That cuts off all the debate except for that of the sponsor. Representative Powell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our hands were tied several years ago by another General Assembly, 2 members in the House and the Senate that tried to block our ability to pass Medicaid expansion. A lot of members were not here then. I think we have turnover in membership, that we can really move forward and advance Medicaid expansion in our state. And I want to remind the members that the member of the House that actually blocked Medicaid expansion was expelled. He was expelled. The member of the Senate who carried that legislation pled guilty to a felony. Members, this body followed the guidance of two people who both left this body on unfavorable terms. We can accept, and we are paying right now for Medicaid expansion across this nation. Let's tackle this issue of gun violence by utilizing and accepting Medicaid expansion for victims of gun violence in the state of Tennessee. We could all bring this bill today and pass Medicaid expansion. I'd love to go further. I would love to go further. We have tried on multiple times to look at different ways of passing Medicaid expansion. But the time is now to tackle this issue of gun violence. We're talking about resources for mental health, resources for victims who are going to suffer the rest of their lives for these injuries that they have occurred. And it's not just injuries that they've occurred, but also mental health and situations that they're going to have to deal with as victims of gun violence. I know we have heard again and again from members in this body who have shared their own personal experiences with gun violence. We can do the right thing right now and accept Medicaid expansion for victims of gun violence. I would ask you to vote against the tabling a motion, and let's do the right thing for Tennesseans in this budget. Thank you.
Parliamentary situation is Representative Powell has moved adoption of amendment number 6. Representative Todd has moved that motion to the table. We are voting on the tabling motion. All those in favor vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 74, 24 nays.
Tabling motion prevails. Call up next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Amendment 7 by Representative Sherrill. Mr. Speaker, it was not timely filed.
Representative Sherrill, you're recognized.
To withdraw.
Without objection, withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Amendment 8 by Chair Lady Hazelwood. Mr. Speaker, it was not timely filed.
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would move this to the Hill.
Without objection, rolled to the Hill. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Amendment 9 by Representative Rudd. Mr. Speaker, it was not timely filed.
Representative Rudd, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Amendment 10 by Chair Lady Hazelwood. Mr. Speaker, it was not timely filed.
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, move to the Hill.
Without objection, rolled to the Hill. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Amendment number 11 by Representative Dixie. Mr. Speaker, it was not timely filed.
Representative Dixie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this amendment, what it does, it would appropriate some funds in order to build some infrastructure on State Route 386, which resides in Sumner County and Davidson County. And with the growth of Davidson County, we have seen that we need to ease some traffic regulations and lanes. And with the governor's, it coincides with the governor's flex lanes. So I would move for consideration of amendment number 11.
All right, so you've heard the motion. It's untimely filed, so we have to do consideration first. We're voting for consideration of amendment number 11. All those in favor of considering amendment number 11, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 25, 74 nays.
In accordance with Rule 60B, having failed to receive the necessary two-thirds vote, the motion to consider amendment number 11 fails. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Amendment 12 by Representative Mitchell. Mr. Speaker, was not timely filed.
Representative Mitchell, you're recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, my amendment takes $10 million that's appropriated in the budget for the Music City Executive Airport. We'd hate to give any money to one of these airports. We'd probably have to take over its board, but we're going to take that $10 million and we're going to move it to ECD because we've done significant damage to the brand over the last few weeks here in the state. So ECD is going to need all the money they can get to be able to bring businesses into the state of Tennessee again. So, I just would hate to have to take over that airport in Gallatin if we give them any money. That they'd be indebted to us then. But the state though, ECD, they're gonna need some help with helping to clean up this brand problem we've created in the General Assembly. With that, I ask for your consideration.
Representative Mitchell makes the motion for consideration. You've heard the motion. Any discussion? Seeing none, we're voting for consideration of amendment number 12. All those in favor of considering amendment number 12, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 24, 75 nays.
In accordance with Rule 60B, having failed to receive the two-thirds vote, the motion to consider amendment number 12 fails. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Amendment 13 by Representative Parkinson. Mr. Speaker, was not timely filed.
Representative Parkinson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I come before you today to amend the budget in favor of a cause that requires all of our attention. As we all know, the issue of sexual assault is one that deeply affects our society, and we must do more to combat it. Therefore, I strongly advocate that we use $16.2 million allocated for airport projects to fund the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's effort to get rape kits tested. Let me take you back to last year when a young woman by the name of Eliza Fletcher was murdered by accused rapist Cleotha Henderson. Her attacker abducted her while on a morning run and brutally assaulted her. She died a horrible death that no family member should ever have to witness or to deal with. Eliza's death could have been avoided because in 2014, as again this year, we heard legislation that would get TBI to test rape kits and turn them around in 30 days.
Oh, it's 1 minute on an amendment, they say. Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, but I didn't see a clock up there.
They said it was up there.
It was up there?
That's what they said.
Okay, so to wrap it up, I want to take $16.2 million and get it to TBI so that they can test rape kits and start moving the needle with getting them done within 30 days so the victims of rape and the victims of sexual assault can get the justice that they need. It is our job to protect the women and children. That's what this amendment is about. And I hope that you will allow this amendment to get on, at least for the discussion at a minimum. Move to adopt.
To consider. Yes,
To
sir.
consider.
You've heard the motion. We're voting for consideration of amendment number 13. All those in favor of considering amendment number 13, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 26, 73 nays.
In accordance with Rule 60B, having failed to receive the necessary two-thirds vote, the motion to consider amendment number 13 fails. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that brings the body back to the heel of the amendments. House Finance, Ways and Means Committee Amendment number 1.
Amendment number 1, hang on, let me get back. Vice Chairman Baum, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw. Roll to the,
Without objection, roll to the Hill. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Finance Ways and Means Committee Amendment Number 2.
Vice Chairman Baum, you're recognized.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to adopt, defer to the sponsor for an explanation.
Vice Chairman Baum moves adoption of amendment number 2, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of amendment number 2 say aye, aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Finance Ways and Means Committee Amendment Number 3.
Vice Chairman Baum, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to adopt and defer to the sponsor for an explanation.
Vice Chairman Baum moves adoption of amendment number 3, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Representative Pearson.
From what I see, it says, thanks, Speaker, it says legislative amendment to the appropriation bill. What does this amendment do?
Vice Chairman Baum.
Mr. Speaker, this is the legislative amendment to the appropriations bill.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you. What does that mean? What does it do? What does it say?
Vice Chairman Baum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the amendment that adds to the bill all of the legislative initiatives. We have a number of appropriations amendments that we are adding to this budget. We have a number of bills that we're going to be passing that will be funded by this budget. This is the amendment that funds legislative priorities, which are our priorities from this body.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Speaker. Maybe this is a parliamentary inquiry, but it doesn't have an amount associated with this amendment. But I did see in the next piece of legislation, for instance, like increase in state expenditures and stuff like that. Is there a reason that we don't know how much these amendments cost?
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Yes, sir, Mr. Speaker, I would object. That is not a parliamentary inquiry. That is an inquiry that the member can ask when we are discussing the budget, or that it can ask on this particular amendment, but it's not a parliamentary inquiry.
All right. Mr. Clerk. Representative Pearson, can you hit the clock for a second? Are you asking why there's not a fiscal note on this? Is that your question?
That's right. And what the cost of this amendment would be?
Chair Lady Hazelwood, do you want to answer that?
This is basically the budget, and the cost is $52.6 billion.
Representative Pearson, so you can start the clock again.
Okay, so our legislative priorities of this body is $52 billion.
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Mr. Speaker, I apologize, my dyslexia kicked in. It's $56.2 billion. That is the state budget.
Representative Pearson.
Yeah. And so is it not an inquiry as to why we don't have a fiscal note attached to this? Why is that? I appreciate you just saying that too, Chair Lady. Oh, just why isn't it a part of this?
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Because the fiscal note is $52.6 billion. It is 56.2. Thank you all. It is $56.2 billion. It is the budget. It is what we'll be discussing once this amendment is attached. Then we'll go back and go through all of the expenditures and show where that $52.6 billion. The legislative portion of this is $256,183,900. And that is on the sheet that was handed out yesterday in finance and is publicly available. It shows that amount.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you. I just want to make sure we're all building our civics muscles here. So this amendment is not the 56.2 billion, it's the 200 million. Let's clarify, because some of the other members, I know they didn't know the answer either. Go ahead, Chairwoman.
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you. This the legislative portion. This is what the legislature has allocated in this budget, and that is the $256 million figure. The total budget, we have added Amendment 2 already. That is the administration's budget, which was the base budget. The total budget is $56.2 billion.
Representative Pearson.
Helpful, and I think everybody here is learning because the total budget is 56.2. This amendment is 256, you said? Yeah, and that's just what this legislative body is putting forward. And we can find out where that 256 million is going and to whose districts. Where do we find that?
Chairlady Hazelwood.
The budget document will have an allocation that shows all of these expenditures, not necessarily by district, it's sometimes by department. There are appropriations amendments that are specific to to districts. That also was handed out yesterday in finance.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you. So last clarification. So this $256 million, we do have a document today, and I can ask, maybe that's parliamentary inquiry to see that today that says where all of the money of the legislative priorities of this body are going. That's correct?
Chairlady Hazelwood.
That information is on your dashboard.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you.
All right. We're voting on amendment number 3. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those say no. The ayes have it. You adopt. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that brings the body back to Amendment 8 by Representative Hazelwood. Mr. Speaker, is not timely filed.
Chairlady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a technical correction. I would move for consideration.
You've heard the motion. We're voting for consideration of amendment number 8. All those in favor vote aye when the bell rings. All those in favor vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 95, 2 nays.
In accordance with Rule 60B, having received the necessary 2/3 vote, the motion to consider amendment number 8 prevails. Chairlady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for adoption.
Chairlady Hazelwood moves adoption of amendment number 8. It's a proper motion, probably seconded. Any discussion? Chairman Clemens, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chairwoman Hazelwood, why are we substituting Commission on Children and Youth for administration of office of the courts here? What's the effect of that?
Chairlady Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The effect is to put the funding stream back under the purview of the Commission on Children and Youth rather than the AOC. When we did the budget amendment or the appropriations amendment, we had put in some additional dollars for CASA, and we were going to have those distributed through the AOC, but the base budget had the dollars for CASA being distributed through the Commission on Children and Youth, and so we put that back so that all the money is coming through that one stream.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none, all those in favor of amendment number 8 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 98, 1 nay.
Amendment number 8 is adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that's next item up is Amendment 10 by Chairlady Hazelwood. Mr. Speaker, was not timely filed.
Chairlady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would move for consideration of Amendment 10.
You've heard the motion. We're voting for consideration of amendment number 10. All those in favor of considering amendment number 10, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 97, 2 nays.
In accordance with Rule 60B, having received the necessary 2/3 vote, the motion to consider amendment number 10 prevails. Chairlady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for adoption of Amendment 10.
Chairlady Hazelwood moves adoption of amendment number 10. Any discussion? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 10, vote aye when the bell rings. All those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 96, 2 nays.
Amendment number 10 is adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, once again, to the heel of the amendments, House Finance, Ways and Means Committee Amendment number 1.
Vice Chairman Baum, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairlady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for passage of third and final consideration of House Bill 1545.
Chairlady Hazelwood renews her motion.
And stand ready to go through an explanation with the indulgence of the Speaker.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a $56.2 billion budget. Please don't hold it against me that $4 billion among friends. But this budget totals $56.2 billion. It's the same total as last year's budget, but there's a major difference in that this budget includes $4 billion more in state sales tax earnings. We've had a robust year, as most of you are well aware, and that means $4 billion less from the federal government. So while the budget is the same, we're more reliant on our own money than on the federal tax dollars that we were last year. There are a number of major initiatives in this budget that I think we can all go home and be very proud of. I hope that you will support. One of the initiatives, top of mind for all of us, school safety. There's $140 million in recurring funding for one SRO per public school. This money in the budget will ensure that every public school in Tennessee will be able to have an SRO officer at their facility to help protect those children. The grants, it will be a grant process administered through the Department of Safety, through the local and law enforcement agencies, once they have entered into an MOU or memorandum of understanding with their local education district. The purpose of the grant is to fund that one SRO at each public school. Again, I think this is critically important and something that I hope that you will be proud of, and it will help our students feel safer that there will be an SRO at all of our public schools. There's $40 million in non-recurring funding for school safety grants for our public schools. The governor's base budget had $20 million in it for that purpose. In our with our legislative conferences with the Senate, with input from members, we have doubled that amount to 40. In the proposed governor's budget, there was $7 million for safety grants for non-public schools. Again, we have chosen to double that to $14 million. There is $29 million to fund 122 positions within the Department of Homeland Security for the school safety initiative. This will provide the equivalent of one Department of Homeland Security agent for each county, although they will be deployed on a regional basis and will be available to cross county lines and support each other. In this budget, we are making sure that we are taking care of, to the next initiative, our folks who work in state government with salary components. The budget includes over $113 million in recurring funding for a 5% across the board raise for state employees. $125 million of that is earmarked within TISA funding for teacher raises. I want to repeat that. $125 million is earmarked within TISA funding in this budget for teacher raises. Again, tell your teachers $125 million additionally in this budget for their salaries. Last year, the administration used over $100 million for Team Act market rate adjustments for our state employees and their departments. This year, we have an additional $65 million included for further adjustments. And in order to provide needed adjustments to legislative salaries, frankly, we haven't done a great job at taking. All right, my time is short, so we will have there's a salary component, there is K through 12 education. I mentioned teacher salaries. In addition to that, there's additional other funding that I'm sure we'll get into. But one of the things I want to highlight is that the state is going to be paying teachers for 6 weeks for FMLA leave. It will not be a cost to local governments. It is state will pick up that total. We have mental health expansions. We have tax cuts to the tune of $404 million. And we have a hospital buyback initiative. Again, this is a straight legislative initiative, something that the speaker was very concerned about and kind of helped direct us on how to make this happen. But we're going to make sure that our rural hospitals and our safety net hospitals have funding that will help carry them through this next year while we work with all the various departments and the.
Representative Faison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Chair Lady Hazelwood. Is it in order for me to ask you to continue to go on? There's so many good stuff when it comes to mental health, all kind of stuff in here, and I don't feel like we were able to quite get it in 5 minutes. So I'm just asking for a few more minutes for you to continue to go on my 5 minutes that I just got. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I apologize for my verbosity, but there is a lot in
Hang on, Chair
56.2.
Lady. Chairman Faison, would you like to ask her a question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Madam Chair, could you tell us some more about what's in this budget?
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would be happy to. K through 12 education is a huge area also of investment in this budget. We have $350 million in new funding, recurring money in new funding for the TISA formula, for the salary increases I mentioned, for health insurance retirement, for the base weights for our per student allocations, for direct funding, and for outcomes. And that brings the total TISA funding, with funding from last year, to more than $1 billion. The budget also includes $21.5 million in recurring funding for the expansion of the summer learning camps for K through 3, and allows ninth grade students to also participate in these camps. So, and I know there's been some issues. Some of you may have heard from some folks back home about some information from the departments that has been sent out that has a lot less allocation money for these camps. I'll tell you that those are being revised and your LEAs will be receiving new numbers. There's $10 million for summer transportation grants so that we can get these kids who want to participate or need to participate in these summer learning camps to school. There's $7.6 recurring dollars to fund tutoring services for the K through 3 students who may be retained. There's $1.3 million for market rate adjustments for teachers at our specialty schools, like the Tennessee School for the Blind, the Tennessee School for the Deaf. Those folks have been left behind in some of the other raises that we have provided, so this will bring them to parity with their colleagues. There's $15.5 million recurring to hold the locals harmless, to fund, as I mentioned earlier, the 6 weeks paid family leave for teachers. Again, this will be paid at the state expense. The LEAs will not pick up additional expense, but we will be providing teachers 6 weeks paid family leave, which has not been done before. In the mental health arena, we have $8 million recurring to expand K through 12 behavioral health liaisons in our schools. And we have $13 million for residential reentry housing programs for those who have been incarcerated and returning to the communities. But here's another big thing that you need to brag about when you go back home and talk about this budget, and that is the fact that we have $404 million worth of tax cuts. The largest piece of that is $207 $72 million that will allow us to provide a 3-month sales tax holiday on food. That holiday will run from August 1st to October 31st, and that includes $111 million so that the locals will be held harmless. So while no Tennessean will have to pay taxes on food during those 3 months, no local government will lose sales tax income because of that. We have increased the threshold of business taxes from $10,000 to $100,000. So if you have a small business, you make less than $100,000, you don't have to file taxes. That saves you money both on not filing the taxes, but also not having to pay somebody to prepare those taxes and fill them out for you. We are doing a number of things in the franchise and excise tax arena, decreasing, again, helping businesses to be able to use their money that they earn to turn back, invest it in their business, to grow their business and grow jobs in Tennessee. I mentioned the hospital buybacks. We're putting $110 million into a non-recurring dollars. And it's funding that's earmarked from TennCare reserves to provide relief for funding hospitals. And after this, the TennCare reserve will still be at more than $1 billion, just a little over $1 billion. So we're not harming TennCare, but we are enabling our rural hospitals and our safety net hospitals continue to operate and to take care of Tennesseans. In non-recurring statewide grant pools, we've done this a couple of years in a couple of different arenas. It's proved to be very successful. Here's something else that particularly those of you in the more rural areas will be excited to hear about, and your folks are going to be excited to hear about it. Last year, we had grants for volunteer fire departments at $5 million. This year, we put an additional $5 million into that pool. So there's $10 million that volunteer fire departments across the state will be able to apply for grants for. We're putting a pool for $3 million for rescue squads. EMS is $200. And in addition to that, EMS folks will now be available or have access to $800 in supplemental training funds. We have a senior citizen center pool of $1 million. And we have a number of museums across the state that house artifacts and history that's important to our various communities. Many of them are small, operating on a shoestring. They need some help. We have a number of requests to do that. So we have $5 million that we're putting into a pool, and the Tennessee State Museum, who has the expertise in this area, will be managing those funds and distributing those grants. We have $2.5 million in a pool for inclusion parks like the Miracle Fields and other facilities across the state that are being built to make sure that all Tennesseans can have access to activities that they will enjoy. And we also have $1 million included in the AA for TDEC for additional funding, something that we did last year. We funded adult changing tables. This $1 million will fund adult changing tables in all of our state parks. Our Tennessee, we have a lot of initiatives in this budget that deal with making Tennessee families stronger. We have a total of $85 million that will go to improve maternal, postpartum, and children's health outcomes through TennCare. We're going to do that by expanding the eligibility threshold for TennCare coverage, and we're going to permanently expand a pilot program that we put in place last year that provided postpartum coverage for a full year. That will now be a permanent program. We're also implementing a 12-month continuous TennCare eligibility for low-income children to make sure that every child in Tennessee has access to the health care that they need. We have $42 million that will be distributed through the Department of Developmentally and Intellectually Disabled. That is going to help foster families who care for children with those kinds of issues. It requires more resources to care for children who are developmentally and or intellectually disabled. It also will provide for expanding the provider network for children with developmental and behavioral needs and provide respite care for children that are in DCS custody. $10 million in TennCare shared savings are being used to fund a pilot program for free diapers for children under the age of 2. And there's $16 million for the second year of the dental services pilot program that we set up last year. That program was intended to and has been successful in addressing unmet dental service needs and increasing the number of dentists practicing in the state. Dental health is a huge contributor to overall health problems in the state, and we have a shortage of dentists and we have a shortage of access. So this program will continue to address that. For our state parks, which many of us call the jewel in Tennessee's crown, $329 million is set aside for state parks, for natural areas and forests, and that includes funding to make our parks more accessible for every Tennessean. Again, I think it's important to note that there are many things in this budget that are going to make it better, make life more fuller, if that's correct terminology, for those who have handicaps of various sorts, and allow them to enjoy all of the things that the rest of us are able to enjoy in our great state. There's $41 million for trails and greenways, $82 million for environmental cleanup, and there's $308 million in capital appropriations for state park improvements statewide. Transportation, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we had a lengthy discussion on this floor, and we passed a $3 billion transportation modernization fund, which included $300 million.
That's the additional 5. Representative Sapicki.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and just want to say a couple things. First of all those grants you talked about for volunteer fire departments, those miracle fields, those are huge things that are going to benefit everybody across Tennessee. So thank you for doing that. Second of all, the school safety grants that we put into this budget, for those members that voted for those, thank you for doing that. It is going to make our schools safer for our children. It's going to make our teachers safer. It's going to provide a better environment for them to be able to learn in. So thank you for doing that. And the members who voted for that, thank you very much. Also, just for clarification, in the original budget proposal from the governor, they had some language in there to help out Memphis with their sports facilities. Is that money still in the budget for Memphis to be able to help them out?
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is $350 million in the budget for projects, in a number of projects that are tourism related, to improve the economy and, I guess, the interest in the Memphis sporting arena, sporting venues.
Representative Sapicki.
And then, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Then also, you talked about the $56.2 billion, but not all of that money is recurring. There's a huge amount of that that's non-recurring expenses. Is that correct?
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
That is correct.
Representative Sapicki.
Would you happen to have that number handy so we can know exactly how much space we have in case this economy would turn south?
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
That'll take us a minute if I can get back to you. But you're right, and I think it's important to note.
You're fine, Chair Lady Hazelwood.
It's important to note that we are very conservative in Tennessee, and a lot of these numbers that I've talked about, a lot of these things that I've talked about, they are non-recurring because we are not sure what the economy is going to bring going forward. Every economist that I listen to talks about recession. They keep kicking the can down the road a little bit about the wind, but everybody is expecting some sort of shrinkage in the economy. So we make very sure in Tennessee that we don't obligate funds that we don't have.
Representative Sapicki.
Thank you. And is there anything else you want to tell us about this budget? Thank you.
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you, Chairman Sapicki. I'll try to finish up in this segment, but yes, I talked about the tax cuts and the pools. I think and strong families, parks, law and safety. One of the things that I didn't mention is that we have $357 million allocated for expanding the Tennessee Advanced Communications Network, known as TNCAN. And that was going to improve emergency radio coverage. It helps to purchase local radios for local agencies. It's going to make our emergency services personnel be able to talk with each other, work with each other in cases of disaster and other sorts of emergencies. We have $28.7 million allocated that will fund 142 new state troopers. We are funding a new judge in the 13th, the 19th, and the 22nd Judicial District. And there's $75 million set aside for a statewide e-filing court system that is going to help our courts to be able to operate more efficiently and also to share information on a more timely basis. In economic development, which Tennessee has done a great job in growing our jobs and growing our economy, we continue to focus on that, and we have $45 million non-recurring for rural development funds for grants and services that will enhance Tennessee's rural communities that in some cases continue to struggle a bit. These grants will go to distressed counties. It will help them with industrial site development, with community asset improvements. Will help them to market and plan to market their own resources and the things that make them unique. We'll also go towards grants available again to continue with the downtown revitalization efforts that have really turned a lot of our county courthouse squares around. There's $10 million for historic development grants and $103 million in the Fast Track Fund. In higher ed, and here again, this is something that's going to impact almost everybody in here and in their communities. We're putting $1 billion, that's $1 billion, going to the Tennessee Board of Regents for TCATs. That is going to include $386 million for new buildings, new locations, $147 million for those new campuses, and then $370 million to replace some of our aging facilities on our existing campuses. We have $5.3 million allocated. That's going to allow Hope Scholarship students to continue to receive the Hope Scholarship for up to 5 years from their initial enrollment. We all know sometimes things happen when we're in school. We have to drop out for a while. This will allow students to use that within 5 years. Will also allow those students, many of whom we have in Tennessee now who are in dual enrollment, who graduate from high school with a year or so of college behind them, they will be able to use that fourth year of the Hope Scholarship towards the graduate program if they choose to do so. Those are the ways that we're spending our money. Let's talk a minute about what we're doing to save funds. We're putting another $250 million into the rainy day fund. That total is now over $2 billion. We're putting $250 million to fund our OPEB liability. This is the liability, the healthcare coverage costs for retirees. We all know how healthcare costs are continuing to rise, so we want to make sure that we have that funded. And we have $300 million going to fund our Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System liability. We're going to make sure that every Tennessee employee, every teacher who's part of TCRS, when they retire, the money that they're counting on and depending on in their pensions is going to be there for them. And as I mentioned earlier, we're using $110 million of TennCare reserves to fund the hospital buybacks. That's a non-recurring expenditure. And as I believe I mentioned earlier also, our intent is that over this coming year, all the players and the participants in that field, including TennCare, the hospitals, other providers, we're asking them to come to the table and figure out a formula that will allow us to make sure that our rural hospitals and our safety net hospitals are fairly compensated for the care that they provide and that they can continue to operate and provide the necessary care for citizens in Tennessee. So with that, that's an overview. And I stand ready for any other questions. Thank you.
Representative Hardaway.
Over here.
Representative Hart, where? Oh, there you are. Sorry, at Love's desk.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the rundown. I didn't hear anything regarding minority health. What is minority health getting in this budget? And how does it relate to the previous fiscal year?
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
All right, in healthcare, I mentioned the mental health funding, $136.7 million. $34.7 million is recurring, $102 million non-recurring. That will fund evidence-based program grants for jails. We have $8 million recurring to expand the K through 12 mental health liaisons that I mentioned already. $63 million non-recurring for the Western Mental Health Institute, a new replacement facility, that's phase 2. $250,000 non-recurring for families, free treatment, education, and intervention services. We have $150,000 non-recurring for the Helen Moss McNabb Center Military Services Program. A number of other, Jason Foundation, another number of other not-for-profits that do work that benefits the state. $13 million for a residential reentry housing program. I mentioned that earlier. This will operate 6 residential facilities, and these will serve individuals with severe and persistent mental health challenges that are reentering the community from incarceration. So $12 million for opioid settlement, that will to increase substance use residential treatment bed capacity, $9 million for provider rate increases that are necessary as our providers are facing the same inflationary pressures that everyone else is. $7 million non-recurring for Alliance Healthcare Services for crisis wellness centers. We have money for Juvenile Justice Division program. We have drug court contracts. And then TennCare initiatives, we have $11.4 million in Health Starts initiative that provides non-recurring funding for the second year for a TennCare initiative that integrates whole person health approaches for TennCare members. 125.3 Medicaid Management Information System that's going to be paid for with reserve funds. We have hospital buybacks that I mentioned. We have developmentally and intellectually disabled initiatives. I mentioned those earlier.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you. But the only thing I wanted was whatever was allocated through the mental health in terms of, minority health in terms of the State Department of Health.
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Representative Hardaway, I'm not sure that we have anything allocated specifically for minority. Our allocations are for all Tennesseans, regardless of color, race, creed, or ethnicity. So we don't have a specific line item that says minority health.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, but I'm asking for it's a department within the Department of Health.
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We don't have that level of detail. We will have to get that for you.
Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to talk about some of the items that the chairwoman did not include in her description of this budget. $50 million for future prison construction. $13.2 million for special airport funding in Sumner and Cumberland counties, which happen to be the home counties of the House Speaker and the Republican Majority Leader.
I appreciate that comment. Thank you very much.
But no other small airport receives that special funding except the House Speaker's district and the Republican Leader's district. No other small airport in this body receives that special funding. They have to rely on regular funding from the Transportation Equity Fund. So that's $13.2 million for the Speaker's district and the Republican Majority Leader's airport. In addition, there's $2 million to audit TSU. So continuing this attack on our only public historically Black college. In addition, there's a lot of corporate welfare in this budget. We have special exemptions for corporate jets, for tax breaks for their fuel. And so let's talk about this budget, Chairwoman. It doesn't do anything meaningful for working class Tennesseans overall. You talked about funding more police in schools. You talked about funding more, making our schools into mini jails. That's not what the Tennesseans are asking for. What Tennesseans are asking for and what this budget does not fund is health care for all Tennesseans, universal pre-K for Tennesseans. It does not fund tax relief for working class families like my proposal to tax corporations that pay their CEO over 100 times more than the average worker. This budget does not fund meaningful change. This is a status quo budget. This is a budget that is a do-nothing budget. And so we can't sit here and read through all these things to act like we're doing something when we see that this budget is not doing anything meaningful to change the lives of our people. 1 in 5 children in Tennessee live in poverty. What does this budget do for them? There's a scripture in the Bible that says you put your treasure where your heart is. We are not prioritizing the most vulnerable of our state. This is a budget that is trying to maintain the status quo under the guise of giving crumbs to everyday people and giving the Speaker and Republican Majority Leader extra benefits to bring back to their district and to lie like they're doing something. And so this budget, I can't support this budget. And I will not support this budget because it's an immoral budget. It's a budget that does not make any significant change. And why are we putting $50 million for more mass incarceration, to build more prisons? Let's put that money toward our public schools. Let's put that money toward giving even more money to our teachers and not just a small, meager increase. But let's really invest in them. Let's take this money from the Speaker and the Republican leaders' airports and let's put that into the communities that are hurting. I just don't understand why that was left out. This budget is funding a police state. You talked about $140 million to put a police in every school. That's not what Tennesseans are asking for. They're asking for meaningful gun legislation. That's what they're asking for, Chairwoman. And so we need to be honest about what this budget's going to do. And so I know everyone gave you their time to read through every item on that, but I'm just curious why you left out that special exemption for the Speaker and Republican Majority Leader. Why did you leave out talking about how much we're putting for future prisons? Why did you leave that out of your description of this budget?
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate your comments. You are incorrect in one area. The airport funding, there's no airport funding specified. That is not, I believe, in the Republican leaders district. There is $50 million for general airports, general aviation in the state. The $50 million that you're referring to is from the prisons, for the future prisons, is set aside from non-recurring funds. We have a number of prisons in the state that at some point are going to have to be replaced. We have additional funding now, and we don't live in a perfect world, and there are people who do evil things, people who do illegal things, and they need to be separated from society. For that purpose, we have to provide prisons. We have the dollars here available now. We set them aside so that when the time comes that we do need a new prison or have capital maintenance needs for existing prisons, the funds will be there.
Representative Jones.
Page 5, $13.2 million earmarked for small airports in Sumner and Cumberland counties. We have to be honest about what this budget is doing. It is not uplifting the vulnerable. Let's invest in universal pre-K. Let's invest in quality public education for all students. Let's invest in healthcare as a human right. Let's do what other states are doing across the nation to advance their people forward and invest in meaningful, significant change for Tennesseans and not just do the...
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would put this budget up against any budget in any state in this country. Tennessee leads the way. We are fiscally responsible. We are giving money back to our citizens in a fiscally responsible way. We are doing things to take care of Tennessee families. When we talk about investing in corporations and businesses, we are working to change the tax structure for businesses so that they will be able to invest and reinvest and provide jobs so that families will have opportunities to provide for themselves. This budget is a budget that I am proud of, and I'm sorry that you can't support it. I hope that others will. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Representative Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And first of all, thank you, Chair Lady Hazelwood, and your team for all the work that y'all put in on this. Chair Lady, I was very happy to hear the state employees were getting a 5% raise. And when we talked about the teachers, you said 125 million, but you didn't give a percentage on that. Is it possible that there's a percentage for the teachers that we can go back and tell them?
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We didn't put a percentage, we put a total amount because the percentage is going to be dependent on different in each LEA, depending on the number of teachers. We fund through TISA, whichever the pronunciation is correct, that's the worst acronym ever, but we fund teachers through that formula, but there are LEAs that have decided at their own expense to have additional teachers. So the funding that we put into for teacher raises is based on the funded number of teachers. When you get into a district that might have additional teachers, then those dollars have to be spread further. So the percentage could vary from LEA to LEA.
Representative Beck.
Thank you. And I was excited to hear that the teachers will get a 6-week paid maternity or paternity. Is that correct?
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
That is correct.
Representative Beck.
We also had state employees getting it was 12 weeks, I believe. Was it cut back to 6 weeks for maternity or paid maternity or paternity leave?
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Is correct.
Representative Beck.
Very good. That's all I have. If there's anything else you would like to tell us about the budget, you've got 3 minutes.
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you, Representative Beck, for the additional time. I'll just be open to other questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Johnson of Knox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I believe that a budget is a moral document, and it's a document that says what we prioritize in Tennessee. And I heard you say a lot of things that I definitely support that were good items in that budget, and I appreciate that. However, I also feel that what I'm seeing is a lot of Band-Aids. And when we have the ability to expand Medicaid and add 300 to 400,000 Tennesseans to the roll, and it wouldn't increase our budget by a single penny. To me, that seems like a horrible way to leave people out and leave people behind when we talk about the importance of mental health issues. So that is a big concern of mine. Also, I have a question. You talked a little bit about the 50 million that was set aside for prisons. Is that a state prison or is that a private prison?
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That determination would be made at the time the need for the prison was determined. This is just being fiscally sound and conservative in planning ahead.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you. So is that, we're talking about an adult facility or are we talking about a juvenile facility?
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Again, that would be determined at the time of the need. This is just recognizing the fact, as I said, we have prisons that are aging and we are just preparing for whatever we might need to do in either category. The dollars are just there as it's a savings account, if you will, an escrow account, or when that need does arise.
Representative Johnson.
So it could be juvenile as well as adult from where it's designated from.
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
It's my understanding where it's designated, it's just simply TDOC and prisons, so that could be either.
Representative Johnson.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's see, my other question is in regards to schools. I think that I've reiterated over and over that at the school shooting that I was present in my county, the police officer was in the room when the school shooting happened. I certainly believe we have to have, that we need to secure our schools, do everything we can to make them safe. However, I think it is remiss for us not to be doing anything about keeping guns from reaching our schoolhouse door. It seems that we want the guns to come into school, and we'll fight that battle when they get there. But I believe that there are things that we could be doing to keep guns from the schoolhouse door. There are so many things in this budget that I think don't show the needs, and some of my colleagues have said that. Yes, there are good things in the budget and things that I want to support. However, I don't think that we're prioritizing the most vulnerable. I don't think we're prioritizing our school. It's a big number, yes, but when it comes out to, it's not even, it's like a $1,700 a year raise for teachers, and that is not going to get them making more than they made 10 years ago. And so I think that we are leaving folks behind. Can you tell me the total amount for FedEx? What is the tax cut that FedEx is getting?
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Mr. Speaker, I do not have that number. There is no specific tax cut for FedEx in this budget. There are tax cuts related to aviation fuel that FedEx, Southwest Airlines, Delta, other companies will be having availability for. All of those will entice those companies to continue to grow and serve Tennessee and continue to grow our economy as they've been a critical part of doing so in the past.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you. And what tax break is there on fuel for the citizens of Tennessee in that budget?
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
The tax break for the citizens in Tennessee is primarily the $272 million that will be the food tax removal for 3 months for August 1st through October 31st.
Representative Johnson.
But no relief on fuel, just that $15 to $20 a month for 3 months for families buying groceries. No fuel break for citizens. We've given FedEx multiple tax breaks on fuel, but we've raised taxes on citizens at the.
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Representative, as I mentioned, there's no specific tax break for FedEx. There is a tax break on aviation fuel that will encourage and allow companies to continue to grow, will allow airlines to serve more of our airports in Tennessee. It's a competitive environment out there. We need to attract those companies to our state and keep them here. There is no fuel tax relief for Tennesseans. We passed a transportation bill recognizing the fact that our fuel tax is not supporting our roads as it is. So we could not give a tax break and continue to lower the amount of revenues that we need to build for our roads. So I think I've answered your question to the best of my ability. Thank you.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Speaker. I too believe that budgets are moral documents, and during the presentation of the budget, you didn't mention poverty once. In our state, where children are growing up in poverty in rural, suburban, and urban areas, at a time when we know over half of the children in our county and Shelby County go to bed hungry at night, our state is not prioritizing this significant issue of poverty reduction. The statement was made as we are doing everything possible to help corporations and businesses in our state. And corporations and businesses are really important. In District 86, we've got some of the biggest businesses and corporations, and I understand that. But it's people. And this budget is not people-centered. It is not proximate to people who are struggling on a consistent and daily basis. And in each of the comments that you made, none of it talked about how you're elevating children out of poverty, how this body is helping mothers and fathers who are struggling to make it each day in our state because of the low wages, because of the housing injustices and inequalities that we're seeing. None of it is talking about how the majority of people in our state could be helped. But instead, something that gets pointed out is, there's $140 million to make sure we have a gun at every school. But there isn't a conversation about how hundreds of millions of dollars are going to help with debt relief of people in the state of Tennessee who are paying back loans. There's no mention about how we're going to help people who haven't had access to home ownership because of systemic racism and systemic inequality to get access to home ownership in the state of Tennessee. There's very little mention about environmental and social justice. I represent one of the most polluted districts in our state, where corporations not only pollute the air, but the ground and impact our water. And there's not a conversation about how we ensure that our aquifer and our air is pure. There's no conversation about how expanding healthcare access for children and adults could help our state not have uncompensated care costs. And the one mention of that for our rural folks here was that the state would pay just enough for hospitals that haven't closed down to exist, and for those patients to go home with a whole lot of debt. There's no mention of how the seniors in our areas and districts will be able to have their homes fixed and weatherized. There's no mention of how our state's preparing for the imminent threats of extreme weather and climate change. Budgets truly are moral documents, because they say, what is it that we care about? And when all we care about is how corporations and businesses are doing, but not how the children are doing, not how families in the periphery and those that have been marginalized historically are doing, when we're not talking about how we fix the issues of poverty in our state and ensuring that everybody who is a Tennessean gets access to the resources that they need and that they deserve, we are doing a disservice to the people we are supposed to serve. And so over 200 million was given to specific districts for airports, Representative Jonesman, for these things. But the money for psychiatrists in school was not something that was spoken of. There's no $140 million price tag associated with really helping in that way. $50 million is given to build a future prison, but not $50 million dedicated to prevention. We should and must do a better job at making Tennessee a better place for people to live, and not supporting the exploitation and capitalistic exploitation and policies that continue to entrench and further re-entrench poverty in our state with the practices of this body. That's what we must change.
Chairlady Hazelwood, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't hear a question there, but I do want to take issue with some of the comments that were made. This budget has $14.5 billion in it for TennCare. Those dollars are directed for people who have financial challenges, who are at the poverty level below. We have $405 million in this budget for affordable housing to address one of the issues that was mentioned. On the hospitals, we have a $110 million buyback. I believe I mentioned in my comments, we recognize that is not a fix. What that does is get those hospitals through this coming year as we bring people together to the table to determine what we need to do going forward to develop a formulary that will keep those hospitals operational so that they can take care of Tennesseans. We are putting $85 million to improve maternal, postpartum, and children's health outcomes. We're doing that by expanding the TennCare eligibility threshold for pregnancy for TennCare coverage. We're fully funding and permanently expanding TennCare postpartum coverage for a full year. And we have continuing 12-month continuous TennCare eligibility for low-income children. So while this is not a perfect budget, none ever are, we can never fund all of the needs, but we are putting our money in the places that we care about. When you look at our budget, Our major expenditures are TennCare and education. Those are the two things that take up over 2/3 of this state's budget. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I stand ready for other questions.
Representative Mitchell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, I just wanted to get a little clarification on the teachers' raises. I think it's my understanding that of the $125 million, only 70% of that is state money, 30% of it's local. So it's really only about $89 million the state's given to 75,000 teachers, which if you do the math, it's about $1,100 so to go back to Representative Beck's question, about a 2% raise at a time where I just looked at our last CAFR report, and we've got $16.5 billion in unrestricted reserve funds, and we can only find it in ourselves, and this is all of us in here, to give our teachers that we keep talking that we like them so much, we gonna give them $1,100? You know, we got $16.5 billion laying there that we could use, that if we like these people so much, we could give them a little bit more than $1,100. I mean, you know, that's less than $100 a month we're giving them. So yeah, I'm all for giving teachers raises. I'm glad they're getting the $1,100, but we don't need to pat ourselves on the back and jump up and down and put up a billboard about it, because we're not doing that much for them.
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would point out that since 2011, we have invested $3 billion, more than $3 billion in teacher raises in the state.
Representative Mitchell.
And we're still way underfunding public education in this state. We've tried every little scheme in the world on what we can do to public education, except maybe trying to fully fund it one time and see if that would do something.
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
I didn't hear a question, so.
Yes, ma'am. Representative Hell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chair Lady, to you and to your team, what an awesome job. As I look at this, and you've made some points and kind of echoed it, but out of the $56.2 billion, over $33 billion of it is for education, for TennCare, and for transportation. That tells you where our priorities are and where our treasures and what we treasure in Tennessee. $100 million to go to hospitals in communities like I serve. $33 million to go to nursing homes in communities like I serve. I had filed a bill that would be a 3-month sales tax for seniors, but I'm thankful that we sit here today giving 3-month sales tax on groceries to every Tennessean across this state. And then, as a small business owner, I appreciate the fact that the F&E taxes and personal property taxes and some of those things that affect small businesses, I'm thankful for that, because I can pass that money on to the people that work for me and help families that I serve every day. And then another important part, Senator Reeves and I had a SRO bill that we moved through committee. And I was thankful on a Saturday when I got a phone call from the governor's office that there was going to be an announcement made on a Monday a couple of weeks ago. I've got one county that I serve that has 5 schools with only 2 SRO officers. This is huge. And I'm thankful today that we're going to have money to provide for an SRO officer in every single school across the state of Tennessee. there's so much more that I could say about the whole budget, but I'm thankful again for the work that's been done. Y'all are to be commended. It's not perfect. And I say this all the time. If we're on a scale from 1 to 10, 1's as bad as it can get and 10 is perfect. It'll never be at 10 because we're all people and we don't live in a perfect world. But we get at that 80 or 90%, I think we're at a good place. And this is as good as we can get. And I thank y'all for it.
Chairlady Hazelwood.
Thank you, Representative. We have taken a poll up here, and we might let you present the next budget. Thank you.
Representative Towns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm being harassed over here by this gentleman over here. I can't stand him. It's on my nerve. But thank you for the presentation with the budget. There've been a lot of questions asked and a lot of answers given. A lot of it certainly I agree with. And I guess what's sticking out of my mind right now, coupled with everything that's been said, is we recently underwent COVID about 3 years ago. And it impacted our country and impacted the world quite a bit, devastatingly. I want to zero in, I would love to do education, but I want to zero in on minority, small business, and women businesses. Did we do anything extra for them this year? A lot of those people went out of business never to return. A lot of them may or may not have gone out of business if they had the resources to stay in business. And I don't have to tell you, Chair Lady, that is at the core of our economy, and we want to try to help them. As I traverse the district, many people ask me about what was or if the state was going to do anything to help those kinds of businesses. Because at the end of the day, we still have to work and do everything else we do, education, pay house notes, all this stuff. And I've not heard enough attention to it from us as a body or the state in general about what can we do to help those three categories, small, minority, and female businesses. So is there anything in that budget that deals with them specifically, considering how far behind they fell?
Chairlady Hazelwood.
I'm not aware of a budget line. There may be, I have people looking that addresses that specifically, but I would tell you that minority and small businesses are going to particularly benefit from the tax break that Representative Hale mentioned, that I talked about, the fact that if you're under $100,000 in your revenues, you don't even have to pay taxes. You don't have to file taxes. That's going to help, I think, a lot of existing small businesses. It's also going to help with startup businesses. It allow them to get up and get running without having to worry about hiring somebody to figure out the tax structure to get their taxes paid. So, and I believe we're trying to remember, but in our general services budget presentation, I believe there was some information about the high level of participation in terms of state contracts of minority and women and small businesses. So there is that. As far as a specific line item, again, I'm just told that there is a $250,000 loan program available for small business, minority and female and small businesses, loan forgiveness program.
Representative Towns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So what we're saying is that they can get up to $250,000, just yes or no?
Chairlady Hazelwood.
Thank you. The budget in that fund is $250,000 that those kinds of businesses can access.
Representative Towns.
Okay, so the total is, okay, well, Madam Chair, in the future, I'd like to see, especially since they were so far behind, that we put a little extra effort behind trying to make them whole or restart again or sustain themselves as they are. And also, I would love to see, and I've been here a long time, that when state employees get raises, and it's really, we need to reach and give them more. We really do. What I hear is when they get a raise, the insurance go up. The little money's taken away from them. So we need to stretch out and give them a little more because without the state employees, state doesn't run. And we can, if we decide to look at it, we can do a little bit better for our state employees. And that includes teachers, obviously, but I'd like to just reach a little harder on that and address those small and minority businesses that went out of business. Let's see a study done on that, see how many jobs we lost in Tennessee. And what can we do to address making those whole if we can to bring some of them back. Thank you, Chair Lady.
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
I would mention, I believe I mentioned it, but I might have skipped over it lightly. There was $100 million last year in TMAT market rate adjustments for our state employees. There's a 5% pool for raises for state employees this year. So we recognized, again, employees are in short supply, trained employees in even shorter supply. We have to compete in the marketplace. So those TMAC funds are being used to address that and to make sure that we're able to not only attract, but also to retain our state employees. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker Pro Tem Marsh.
Madam Chairman, I want to stand up and say that I think some of the best things we've done in this budget this year is the $1 billion for our TCATs, our border regions. I think that is generational changing in our communities. We're going to have a school where all of our young people can go, whether they're rich or poor, rural or urban, and learn a trade and come out in maybe 6 months to 2 years with a certificate and know how to do a job and make a good living from their family and stay in our communities and pay really good taxes to our state of Tennessee. So I think this is probably one of the best things that we've done in all of this whole budget to take care of our local people. So I appreciate it so much.
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I always agree with my Speaker Pro Tem. But the $1 billion, we talked a lot about poverty. We talked about health issues and the needs. In my opinion, the best way that we can help all Tennesseans is to prepare them for jobs so that they can take care of their families, so that they can be productive tax-paying citizens. Our TCATs, the $1 billion investment, is going to help us to be able to do that. It's going to provide the needed employees that are businesses that we're attracting to Tennessee. They want to come here, but they have to have a labor market. This is going to make sure that we have that labor market, that our economic development people, when they're going out and selling Tennessee, they'll be able to say, we can provide you trained employees that are ready to come to work. And I think it is a game changer. We're going to have TCATs in areas that we have never had them before. That's going to allow people who have transportation issues to be able to get to these schools, to get those certificates. And as our Speaker Pro Tem has said, to be able to go out and get family wage jobs that are going to allow them to take care of their families and to do what all of us, everybody in here, our goal, I know my goal, I know I share this goal with all of you. All of us want our children to do better than we have done. This will allow us to continue to allow families to make that happen.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Chair Lady, for the budget. I appreciate all the work you've done, and I know how difficult it has been. I do have a couple questions, however. There's about $260 million in the treasurer's earnings, and I think at the end of this year, we're estimating about we estimated 3.7 that we expected the earnings to be. Next year, we're going to be estimating, we're going to actually get about 31.7. And I'm wondering why we are just letting that 260 stay where it's at and not consider it in a recurring way to where maybe we could do some of the things that we want to do currently and view it as a recurring funding.
Chairlady Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The $260 million, when we were speaking with the treasurer, the $50 million was what he was comfortable with, that they actually earnings, a lot of that was projected earnings. So, you know, in this state, we tend to be on the conservative side. We don't want to make promises that we can't keep. So we recognize 50 million of that.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But does the treasurer see it as possible being a recurring amount of money that we can move out of the non-recurring column? That's what I'm concerned about, because based on what we're estimating, the money is coming in on a recurring basis. And I'm just wondering, will we begin to recognize it on the recurring side versus leaving it in the non-recurring column?
Chairlady Hazelwood.
Thank you. These earnings are coming from federal dollars that are flowing through the state. So those dollars will eventually be expended. Those earnings are not going to be recurring. They're short-term recurring, but they're not forever monies. So that's why we continue to recognize them on a non-recurring basis.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Madam Chair. The screen went dark. I think it's House Amendment 2, page 7. I have a question. I think it's Amendment 2. It is. Page 7. It's a list of items around HIV. And I think it says here, you hear what I'm, yeah. I know you have the schedule, but No, I'm saying you have the schedule, but I'm thinking about the actual language. What it says here is it's identifying like several items that's dealing with HIV, and what the language says is that. Oh, you understand the point? Okay, you can explain. All right. Right. The language I'm asking about is that the grantee shall not subcontract any portion of the HIV surveillance and prevention services. So I'm just concerned about why that particular language is in there. It's going to agencies, it's going to municipalities, it's going to different levels of government. And we're saying we're going to send you the money, but you can't use it for this purpose. And I'm just curious about that.
Chairlady Hazelwood.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask for indulgence. We will. Mr. Speaker, that language is, I believe, related to the HI funds that were spoken about earlier. It simply is saying if you receive the money, if you are the recipient of the money, then you have to be the provider of the funds. Rather than going through a third party, you have to be a provider of the services.
Leader Camper.
I understand. Thank you.
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to say thank you to the sponsor and the team for pulling this budget together, and that we have captured our priorities. Thank you. The meetings that were offered last night, both from the Comptroller's office and the information you all put out, was tremendously helpful for those who have done their homework. I do think it's a bit of a disservice sometimes when we say things, we hear things said here that aren't necessarily correct. And sometimes we pontificate on things we don't know about. So I just wanted to touch on the prisons thing again. It's important for us to remember that those dollars that we put toward prisons aren't causing individuals to go be incarcerated. It's actually taking care of people who are being incarcerated at some point in time. So thank you for considering that. And Again, as I'll echo many of my colleagues, funding our SROs is a tremendous thing, and our school systems are going to tremendously appreciate that. So thank you so much for your work.
Chairlady Hazelwood,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I call previous question.
Please raise the call. I'm sure there's objection. So we'll go on the board. All those in favor of previous question, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 74, 22 nays.
Previous question prevails. We are voting. All those in favor of House Bill 1545 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 94, 5 nays.
House Bill 1545, having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion reads series table. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk. Out of order.
House Bill 1543 by Chair Lady Hazelwood and others relative to statutory revisions required for the implementation of the Annual Appropriations Act.
Chairlady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1543 on third and final consideration.
Chairlady Hazelwood, miss passes. Bobby second. Mr. Clerk, call it first amendment.
House Finance, Ways and Means Committee Amendment number 1.
Vice Chairman Bond, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to adopt.
Vice Chairman Bond moves adoption of amendment number 1. Bobby seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye, aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairlady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill makes the statutory changes that are necessary to implement the budget that we just passed. With that, I move adoption.
Chairlady Hazelwood renews her motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 1543 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change the vote? Grills aye. Freeman aye. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 95, 3 nays.
House Bill 1543, having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. Most reconsider table. Call next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1544 by Chair Lady Hazelwood and others, an act pursuant to Article 2, Section 24 of the Tennessee Constitution, providing for the dollar amount and rate by which the growth of appropriations from the state tax revenues will exceed the estimated growth in state's economy and amends Tennessee Code Annotated Title 9, Chapter 4, Part 52.
Chairlady Hazelwood, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1544 on third and final consideration.
Chairlady Hazelwood moves passage. Bobby second. Mr. Clerk, any amendments been filed?
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Chairlady Hazelwood, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the Copeland cap. It simply increases the amount by which state appropriations from state tax revenues for the upcoming fiscal year may exceed the index of estimated growth. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairlady Hazelwood renews her motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 1544, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 95, no nays, one present, non-voting.
House Bill 1544, having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. Most reconsider table. Call next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1542 by Chair Lady Hazelwood and others relative to bonds.
Chairlady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1542 on third and final consideration.
Chairlady Hazelwood moves passage. Bobby second. Mr. Clerk, any amendments been filed?
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Chairlady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill just authorizes the state of Tennessee by resolution of the funding board, which is made up of the constitutional officers, to issue and sell direct general obligation interest-bearing bonds not to exceed $83.8 million. We have no plans to issue bonds, but this simply is a fallback in case there is some situation that arises that is required. This will provide the ability for bonding. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairlady Hazelwood renews her motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Powell.
Thank you. And Chair Lady, I guess my question is, we heard a lot about bonds yesterday. So if a professional sports team was interested in having a bond, would this be that mechanism for which they would do that?
Chairlady Hazelwood.
No.
Representative Powell. Representative Powell.
Thank you for that answer, Chair Lady. I just want to make sure that, no one in my city here has a bond. God forbid we were punished again for taking advantage of our bonds in the state of Tennessee. So I just want to clarify, make sure that is not part of this piece of legislation. Thank you.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleague took the words right out of my mouth. Thank you.
Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with all due respect to my colleagues, I wouldn't say the people of the great state of Tennessee taking on $500 million in debt last year would be punishing your districts, but the rest of us were glad to help out.
Any further discussion? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. We are voting. All those in favor of House Bill 1542, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 96, 2 nays.
House Bill 1542, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion reconsider is tabled. Chairlady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to take this opportunity to thank all the people and all of the work that's gone into this budget. I want to particularly recognize Chairman Hicks, Chairman Williams, Chairman Baum, and our staff, Jessica Himes, Marina Tunick. We could not do this without their help and all the staff that is behind them supporting them. So I just thank you for a job well done and hours well spent.
Chairman Williams, for what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I realize I'm out of order, but we have a huge debt of gratitude to Chair Lady Hazelwood. Chairman Hicks and Chairman Baum and I had the opportunity. Didn't realize she could stay out so late counting money, and her ability to keep all the ducks in a row is by far, guys, miraculous. I mean, it really is. She's done a fantastic job. I'm an honor to serve with and for her, and she's done a great job. And I hope all of y'all would show your appreciation to Miss Patsy Hazelwood, our Chairwoman of Finance.
Leader Lamberth, can you do consent 2?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been asked by the
3,
clerk to
sorry.
take up House Consent Calendar number 3.
Without objection, so ordered. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that's House Consent Calendar 3 that was put together, and it is in the dashboard.
Chairman Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move passage of House Consent Calendar 3 on third and final consideration.
Gentlemen, moves passage of House.
Keep it with Rule 50.
All right, very good. Gentlemen, moves passage of the consent calendar number 3. Probably second. Mr. Clerk, any objections been filed?
Mr. Speaker, no objections filed.
Hang on, I think they're looking. Representative Freeman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know I'm out of order, but I'm going to buy our guys some time here for 1 second. Earlier today, there were 3 World War II veterans that were out here in the whatever the entryway is. I'm not sure what that word is. Sure, the rotunda. Thank you. And they were joined by 4 other veterans Two of them were graduates of West Point. Two of them graduates of the Naval Academy. And they asked if they could be recognized earlier, so I'm gonna do that. Robert Schultz, who was an Army captain, Robert Prentice, who was a Marine captain, Ken Grant, who was a Marine major, and Gene Cook, who was a staff sergeant in the Army. Anyway, they were here to watch us do the people's work today, and I think they deserve our appreciation and thanks.
Any objections? Seeing none, Representative Williams.
Thank you. Just to follow up from my colleague, Speaker, two of those World War II veterans were from Putnam County, one of which I would have never made it to elective office if people didn't think I was his great-grandson. So his name was Ross Williams, and so got to spend some time with them today. And so their father and his son and his grandson, Roger and Trent, were up here with their families. And so just wanted to say hello to them too. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone seeking recognition on the consent calendar? Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I lost my consent calendar, but I did want to say that I think I'm number 14 through, on wrong calendar. Here I am. I'm sorry, this is on consent calendar number 3. I'm sorry, which one are we on?
3.
3, okay. So on number 19 through 24, I want the Shelby delegation listed at the top as co-prime sponsors, and all those voting in the affirmative, if they're okay with my valedictorian and salutatorians listed also as sponsors.
Without objection, exclusion is duly noted. Representative Gillespie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hopefully I'm doing this right. I too, on item number 17, have a recognition here and would like all members of the Shelby County delegation to be listed as prime sponsors.
Without objection, exclusion is duly noted. All right. Anyone else seeking recognition on the consent calendar? Seeing none. We're voting on the consent calendar. Number 3, all members in favor vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Campbell, aye. Williams, aye. Haston, aye. Barrett, aye. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 99, no nays.
Having received a constitutional majority, I declare consent calendar number 3 passed without objection. Most reconsidered table. Lear Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Based on the sign language, I would say we are to take up House Calendar number 1. I would make a motion to do so.
Without objection, so ordered. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, in dashboard, that is the regular one dated for today, Wednesday, April 19th. Item 1, House Bill 523 by Chairman Haston relative to water quality. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman Haston, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 407.
Chairman Haston moves substitute and conform to Senate Bill 407, probably seconded without objection. So ordered. Chairman Haston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 407 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Haston moves passage of Senate Bill 407 on third and final consideration, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Ag and Natural Resources Committee Amendment number 1. Mr. Speaker, same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Chairman Todd, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Same as Senate amendment. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Haston, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill was brought to me by a dredging company that's been in my home county in operation for about 50 years. This bill is a result of TDEC and the Rogers Group and others coming in agreement on the dredging permit process going forward. TDEC has historically granted permits for the purposes of dredging sand and gravel from riverbeds that the state owns. This negotiated bill language simply extends this existing permit process, but now adds that the permittee would pay to the state 2.5% of the market value of the finished product. And with that, I renew my motion.
Chairman Haston renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Pearson, you're recognized.
Thanks, Speaker. I see this addition of the 2.5% of the market value of the finished product would be going back to the state. Before this legislation, if it becomes law, is passed, how much is being paid to the state currently?
Chairman Haston.
0%.
Representative Pearson.
Okay, so the people of Tennessee have received no compensation before this.
Chairman Haston.
That is correct.
Representative Pearson.
Where will these new revenues from this 2.5% be dedicated? Are they going to go back to the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, or are they going into a general fund?
Chairman Haston.
Thank you. The 2.5% goes to the general fund. The license revenue goes to the Environmental Protection Fund.
Representative Pearson.
So that's one of the things I'm curious about, because I think when we look at what's happening, the mitigation of streams, wetlands, all of these things, having more resources going to TDEC, because TDEC will be the ones responsible for it, would be a better use of the funds than the general fund, right? Because TDEC would be responsible for doing that type of work. Is that correct?
Chairman Haston.
That's a fair point. TDEC was in the middle of these negotiations, so they agreed to this current formula, but it might be something that we need to come back and revisit if TDEC is interested in seeing those funds coming directly to them.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you. I think it's a good thing to see the 2.5%, and I think having that going into back into TDEC, who's responsible for helping us in this area, particularly as relates to environmental conservation, is going to be a better use of fund than the general fund, where we don't know if that money ever comes back to mitigate or help with the environmental problems that we know we need to be concerned about.
Chairman Haston.
I renew my motion.
Any further discussion? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 407, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 93, 3 nays.
Senate Bill 407, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. Most reconsidered table. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1426 by Chairman Hicks relative to tax exemptions. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman Hicks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1154.
Chairman Hicks moves substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1154, probably second without objection. So ordered. Chairman Hicks.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 1154 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Hicks moves passage of Senate Bill 1154 on third and final consideration. Probably second. Mr. Clerk, call the first amendment.
House Finance, Ways and Means Committee Amendment Number 1, Mr. Speaker, same as Senate Amendment Number 1.
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you're recognized. Chair Lady Hazelwood, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Hicks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Speaker, Senate Bill 1154 clarifies the sales tax are to be collected for amusement events held at Sports Authority-owned facilities, regardless of whether the operator of the amusement event is a nonprofit organization. With that, I renew my motion.
Chairman Hicks renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1154 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member casts a vote, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 94, no nays, 1 present on voting.
Senate Bill 1154 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The most read series table. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 933 by Representative McKenzie and others relative to voter education. Mr. Speaker, Senate bills on the desk.
Representative McKenzie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform with Senate Bill 346.
Representative McKenzie moves substitute conform to Senate Bill 346. Probably second without objection. So ordered. Representative McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 346 on third and final consideration.
Representative McKenzie moves passage of Senate Bill 346 on third and final consideration. Probably second. Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
House Local Government Committee Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Crawford, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to adopt, defer to the sponsor for further explanation.
Chairman Crawford moves adoption of House Amendment Number 1. Probably second. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of adopting House Amendment Number 1 say aye, aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative McKenzie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill was brought to me by high school students who saw a clear uptick in voter registration and people actually voting when they kind of got a tickler reminder. So what this bill does is twice a year in every school across our great state, they're informed via email, an announcement during school, things of that nature, just to say, hey, if you're turning 18, you may have the right to vote. And the language that's used will be approved by the Secretary of State. So with that, I renew my motion.
Representative McKenzie renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 346 as amended vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take vote.
Ayes 80, no nays, 11 present on voting.
Senate Bill 346 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. Most read series table. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1324 by Leader Camper and others relative to K-12 education. Mr. Speaker, Senate bills on the desk.
Leader Camper, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1268.
Leader Camper moves substitute conform Senate Bill 1268. Probably second without objection. So ordered. Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 1268 on third and final consideration.
Leader Camper moves passage of Senate Bill 1268 on third and final consideration. Probably second. Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
House Education Administration Committee Amendment Number 1.
Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to withdraw in favor of the Senate amendment.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Leader Camper, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members, almost everything in this bill is current law. It's just been rewritten to organize each section so it's more clear. It only adds 2 circumstances when a school board member may participate in electronic meetings up to 3 times a year. It could be due to an illness or convalescence, by doctor's orders, inclement weather due to national disasters, but only when the school is closed. If you are out of the country due to work with notice to the LEA, and if it's a family emergency, only determined by the LEA. Military work and service has unlimited amount of times. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Leader Camper renews her motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1268 vote aye when the bell rings. All those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Bricken, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 84, 2 nays, 1 present, not voting.
Senate Bill 1268, having received a constitutional majority, hereby declare passed without objection. Most read series table. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1107 by Chairman Reagan relative to Tennessee State University.
Chairman Reagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1107 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Reagan moves passage. Bobby second. Mr. Clerk, call the First Amendment.
House Government Operations Committee Amendment number 1.
Vice Chairman Reedy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment extends the Board of the Trustees for Tennessee State University 2025. Move to adopt.
Vice Chairman Reedy moves adoption amendment number 1. Probably second. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Reagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a government operations extension bill duly passed in the committees. With that explanation, I stand ready to answer questions.
Chairman Reagan renews the motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Love.
Thank you, Speaker, and Chairman Reagan, thank you for bringing this piece of legislation that extends the activities of the Board of Tennessee State for 2 more years. We know that it's a great institution and doing wonderful things for our state as the second land grant that we have in Tennessee, the 1890 land grant. We are grateful for the leadership out there and what's going on. So thank you for this extension of their activities for 2 years.
Further. Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the comments there. I renew my motion.
Chairman Reagan renews the motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 1107 has been to vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Member of the Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 93, no nays, 3 present, not voting.
House Bill 1107 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. Most read series table. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 203 by Chairman Reagan relative to the Department of Children's Services. Mr. Speaker, Senate bills on the desk.
Chairman Reagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 307.
Chairman Reagan moves substitute and conform Senate Bill 37 without objection. So ordered. Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize for the misstatement there. I move passage of Senate Bill 37 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Reagan moves passage of Senate Bill 37 on third and final consideration. Bobby second. Mr. Clerk, call the First Amendment.
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Chairman Reagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill extends the Department of Children's Services to 2024 and requires the department to submit quarterly reports to the committee and requires the department to appear for follow-up hearing no later than June of this year. With that explanation, I renew my motion and stand ready for questions.
Chairman Reagan renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Speaker. Does the Department of Children's Services come up each year for under sunset laws?
Chairman Reagan.
No, sir, not usually. Only when their audit reports have dictated such.
Representative Pearson.
So next year, on June 30th, 2024, so before that potentially, we'll get another piece of legislation that extends the Department of Children's Services or not?
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That depends upon their performance on their next audit, sir, and their quarterly reports.
Representative Pearson.
Got it.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, any objection to the, Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker. Chairman, will those quarterly reports that come to the chairs, will those be available online?
Chairman Reagan.
We can make them so if that's your desire, sir.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you very much. We don't need any amendment or anything. You're going to make sure that happens.
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we'll make sure that you have access to them.
All right. Any further discussion? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 37, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member cast a vote? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 93, 1 nay.
Senate Bill 37, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed by objection. Most read series table. Call the next amendment. Next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 234 by Chairman Reagan, an act relative to agency rules scheduled to expire pursuant to the revisions of the Uniform Administrative Procedures Act compiled in Tennessee Code Annotated Title 4, Chapter 5.
Chairman Reagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 68.
Chairman Reagan moves substitute and conform Senate Bill 68 without objection. So ordered. Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 68 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Reagan moves passage of Senate Bill 68 on third and final consideration. Properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call the first amendment.
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Chairman Reagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is our annual rule omnibus bill. It makes permanent all rules filed with the Secretary of State in 2022 and those that have gone through the Government Operations Committee for review. With that, I will entertain any questions and renew my motion.
Chairman Reagan renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 68 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member cast their vote? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 93, no nays, two present, unvoted.
Senate Bill 68 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. Most reconsidered table. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1503 by Chairman Vaughn and others relative to healthcare. Mr. Speaker, Senate bills on the desk.
Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1345.
Chairman Vaughn moves substitute and form Senate Bill 1345. Probably second without objection. So ordered. Chairman Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And now move passage of Senate Bill 1345 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Vaughn moves passage of Senate Bill 1345 on third and final consideration. Probably second. Mr. Clerk, call the first amendment.
House Insurance Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Kumar, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Finance Ways and Means Committee Amendment number 1 filed as House Amendment 2. Mr. Speaker, it's the same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Chairlady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Same as the Senate amendment. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 2 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the past, I've had the honor of bringing bills in front of this body that have been compared to the Magna Carta with regards to their impact on society. Today, I'm regretfully inform you that this is not one of those bills, but I think it probably is substantially better than the Mayflower Compact. Senate Bill 1345 deals with balanced billing and trying to remove surprise bills from consumers dealing with physicians and insurance companies. This bill requires a requirement for insurance companies to report material changes to their networks. It also requires that insurance companies provide a report on the percentages of contract specialty providers at specific hospitals, updates provider network listings quarterly, includes new considerations for the DOCI or Department of Commerce and Insurance to determine if a network is sufficient for consumers, also creates an appeals process for providers, facilities, and consumers to request a review of network adequacy by Commerce and Insurance. The amended bill will give greater consumer protections to insurance networks to better avoid some of the massive provider group changes like we've seen in the Memphis area and give us a little more time to figure out if the federal IDR process or the independent dispute resolution process is functioning the way that it was intended. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Do you renew your motion?
Yes, sir. I'm also renewing my motion.
Chairman Vaughn renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, sponsor. I just wanted to know, what was the year of the Magna Carta?
That's out of order. All right. Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker. To the sponsor, it looks like a mighty fine bill. And can you guarantee it's going to be good for the good folks in historic Orange Mound?
Chairman Vaughn.
Yes, sir. I do believe it will, sir. Some of the provider networks in the Memphis area, particularly within the Methodist system, the way they were adjusted after the federal IDR process was introduced, caught a lot of folks all over the city of Memphis area by surprise by them suddenly finding that their providers were outside of network. So yes, sir, I do believe that this will benefit the good folks in the historic Orange Mound area of Memphis.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you. And it will in no way interfere with the work that you and I plan to do towards an industrial development corporation for historic Orange Mound.
Chairman Vaughn.
This will have nothing to do with interfering with that work, sir. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1345, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please. Chairman Cook, I'm sorry, Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 97, no nays, one present, not voting.
Senate Bill 1345, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Mr. Clerk, call up next bill.
Mr. Speaker, that completes regular one for today. Rolled to the heel of that calendar. Back on Monday's calendar, item 35, House Bill 1231 by Representative Himmer relative to ticket sales.
Representative Freeman, for what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I still see the look of nerve in his face, and I'd love to give him a little bit more time to think on this. If I could make a motion to roll the next two bills to the heel of calendar 2. Calendar 2. We're calendar 3. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Representative Freeman, regular calendar 2. It's 3 on mine, but regular calendar 2
Yeah,
would be the...
regular calendar 2, please.
All right, thank you. Without objection, so ordered. Hey, members, real quick, we've got a couple message calendars to get through, and then we will be done for this evening. Lear Lamberth, can you make the motion for message calendar 1, please?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to make a motion to take up message calendar 1 at this time.
Without
Nope.
objection.
Message calendar 2 at this time, excuse me, according to the clerk.
Without objection, so ordered. Mr. Clerk.
Message calendar number 2, House Bill 163 by Representative Butler relative to adoption. Mr. Speaker, on April 17, 2023, the Senate substituted House Bill 163 for Senate Bill 535, adopted Amendment 2, passed House Bill 163 as amended.
Representative Butler, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to concur to Senate Amendment Number 2, which removes Section 7 of the original bill, which is addressed in other legislation.
Representative Butler moves to concur in Senate Amendment Number 2. Probably second. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Amendment Number 2, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 88, 11 nays.
Senate Amendment Number 2, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare concurred in without objection. Most reconsider is taken. Call up next message, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 817 by Representative Davis and others relative to election laws. Mr. Speaker, on April 17, 2023, the Senate substituted House Bill 817 for Senate Bill 526, adopted Amendment 1, and passed House Bill 817 as amended.
Representative Davis, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I concur with Senate Amendment Number 1. This changes the effective date from upon becoming law to January of 2024.
Representative Davis moves to concur in Senate Amendment Number 1. Probably second. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. Any objection? Oh, Representative Rudd.
I just want to thank the sponsor for carrying this. It went through our committee and it corrects a serious problem. And thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Any objection to the question? Seeing none, we are voting. All those in favor of Senate Amendment Number 1, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Further vote aye. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 76, 21 nays, 2 present on voting.
Senate Amendment Number 1, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare concurred in without objection. Most reconsider is tabled. Call up next message, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 854 by Representative Leatherwood relative to adoption. Mr. Speaker, on April 17th, the Senate substituted House Bill 854 for Senate Bill 919, adopted Amendment 3, and passed House Bill 854 as amended.
Representative Leatherwood, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to concur in Senate Amendment number 3. It simply removes Section 1 in the bill that we originally passed because it was in another bill that the Senate passed. And with that, I again move to concur in Senate Amendment number 3.
Representative Leatherwood moves to concur in Senate Amendment number 3. Following second, discussion on the amendment. Leader Camper, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could you explain what the portion we took out? Could you explain what it did? You said they removed it from our original. Okay.
Representative Leatherwood, you're recognized.
The Section 1 in the bill that we passed, again, it was in another bill that the Senate passed. So this would have been duplicative to something that they did. But with that, so in other words, it's in another bill. So we're not eliminating it completely, if that makes sense. But I can still tell you what it did, if you would like. It dealt with, I can't find my notes. Okay, yeah, the Section 1, which again is in another Senate bill, which they passed, so it will still go into law, just not in this bill. But it dealt with children 3 years and younger who had already been in an adoptive family's home for 6 months already. It gave the judge the ability to not require an additional 6 months that the child has to be in the home before adoption. It also gave the judge flexibility in regards to someone who was turning 18 years old, who had already been in the adoptive family's home for 6 months, but they were turning 18 within that 6 months, I guess, or would turn 18 within an additional 6 months. It gives the judge the flexibility to waive that second 6 month period. And the reason for doing that with those that will be turning 18 is once they turn 18, you know, everything changes and it kind of has you going back to ground zero on the adoption, because now you're dealing with the adoption of an adult as opposed to the adoption of a child. So it just gives the judge the flexibility when dealing with children 3 years old and younger, or who will turn 18 within an additional 6 month period.
Leader Camper. All right. Representative Pierce.
Thanks, Speaker. And sponsor, I remember when we first saw this legislation, the concern for me and remains is the lessening of time that it takes for someone to potentially complete the adoption for a few reasons. One, you lower the period of incarceration from 4 consecutive months immediately preceding the filing to 3 consecutive months if the child is less than 4 years old, in a state and at a time where we're increasingly incarcerating people for longer. In Amendment 2 here, I'm curious who these petitioners typically are, because it says the petitioners are satisfied that the adoption will be in the best interest of the child, then the court is required to waive the 6-month waiting period after the filing of the adoption petition and enter an order of adoption. Typically, are the petitioners individuals who are doing fostering, or could these be agencies? Who are typically the petitioners that we're making this rule for?
Representative Leatherwood.
First, let me say I hope I didn't get us off track here if I understood the leader's question correctly. She was asking me what the Senate took out of the bill in Section 1. And so what I was describing is what the Senate took out of the bill. So it's not in the bill we're looking at right now. And what you were referring to, I know it's been a confusing exchange. What you're referring to was in Section 1 of the original bill, which we actually passed on the floor here before, but it has been taken out by the Senate because they passed it in another bill. So, and this might help, that section 1, which we've been talking about, is not in the bill now. But what the bill does do now with the remaining 2 sections is just clarify the statute for the court ruling to be provided within 30 days of the final hearing. And there's been some confusion apparently with what a bench ruling is as opposed to the actual entry of an order. So the judge can make a ruling there from the bench, but that's different than actually entering an order. And so what remains in the bill, which we're voting on today, is to clarify that the statute for the court ruling to be provided within 30 days. So they don't just want the bench ruling, they want the actual entry within 30 days.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you. Sponsor, when we mentioned the petitioners, are those individuals who are fostering? Are those agencies? Who are typically the petitioners who would be receiving these young people in their care?
Representative Leatherwood.
Of course, I can't speak to every case that might be out there, but generally I believe the petitioners are the individuals who are actually doing the adoption in this situation.
Representative Pearson.
Okay, got it.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Amendment number 3, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 78, 21 nays.
Senate Amendment number 3, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare concurred in without objection. The most read series table. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1560 by Representative Wright relative to Blount County. Mr. Speaker, on April 18, 2023, the Senate substituted House Bill 1560 for Senate Bill 1548, adopted Amendment 1, and passed House Bill 1560 as amended.
Representative Wright, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 1560 is a private act for Blount County. Amendment number 1 states the local hospital will be designated in perpetuity as Blount Memorial Hospital. I move to concur in Senate Amendment number 1.
Representative Wright moves to concur in Senate Amendment number 1, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Representative Love?
Just an explanation on what the change was.
Representative Wright.
Amendment number 1, a paragraph worth, boils down to what it does is it will designate the local hospital in perpetuity as Blount Memorial Hospital.
All right. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Amendment number 1, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 86, 10 nay, 2 present, not voting.
Senate Amendment number 1, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare concurred in without objection. The most read series table. Call the next message, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that completes message calendar number 2.
Mr. Clerk, Lear Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, there are 3 constitutional amendments that we'll be considering at some point in the next few days or weeks. And at this point, I'm going to make a motion to take up item number 14 on calendar 2.
Proper motion without objection, so ordered. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that's item 13. Item 14, House Joint Resolution 13 by Leader Lamberth, a resolution proposing amendment to Article 7, Section 5 of the Constitution of Tennessee to change the date of elections for judicial and other civil officers.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move adoption of HJR number 13.
Leader Lamberth moves adoption, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Local Government Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Crawford, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw in favor of Finance, Ways and Means Committee amendment.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Finance, Ways and Means Committee Amendment number 1 filed as House Amendment 2.
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt and I defer to the sponsor for further explanation.
Chair Lady Hazelwood moves adoption, amendment number 2, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of adopting amendment number 2 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Finance, Ways and Means Amendment number 2 filed as House Amendment 3.
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt and again I defer to the sponsor for an explanation.
Chair Lady Hazelwood moves adoption, amendment number 3, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 3 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request the clerk read HJR number 13 as amended for its first reading.
Mr. Clerk, please read the resolution.
Mr. Speaker, House Joint Resolution 13 as amended on first reading. A resolution to propose an amendment to Article 7, Section 5 of the Constitution of Tennessee to change the date of elections for judicial and other civil officers. Whereas Article 7, Section 5 requires elections for judicial and other civil officers to be held on the first Thursday in August, while Article 2, Section 7 requires elections for members of the General Assembly to be held on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, and whereas Article 3, Section 2 requires the election for governor to be held on the same day as for members of the General Assembly, and whereas Congress has also specified the first Tuesday after the first Monday for the election of United States senators and representatives and electors for president, pursuant to 2 USCA Section 7 and 3 of USCA Section 1, respectively, and whereas having all federal, state, and local elections on the same day would save this state and its local government's money and increase voter participation in local government elections. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the House of Representatives of the 113th General Assembly of the State of Tennessee, the Senate concurring, that a majority of all the members of each House concurring, as shown by the yeas and nays entered on their journals, that it is proposed that Article 7, Section 5 of the Constitution of Tennessee be amended by deleting the following language. Elections for judicial and other civil officers shall be held on the first Thursday in August, 1870, and forever thereafter on the first Thursday in August, next preceding the expiration of their respective terms of service. The term of each officer so elected shall be computed from the first day of September next succeeding his election, and substituting instead the following. Beginning with the election held in 2030, judicial officers and all other elected county officials, except the assessor of property, are elected on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November next preceding the expiration of their respective terms of service. The term of each officer so elected is computed from the first day of December next succeeding the officer's election. Beginning with the election held in 2028, the assessors of property are elected on the first Thursday in August, next preceding the expiration of their respective terms of service. The term of the assessor of property so elected is computed from the first day of September next succeeding his election. Be it further resolved that the foregoing be referred to the 114th General Assembly, and that this resolution proposing such amendment be published in accordance with Article 11, Section 3 of the Constitution of Tennessee by posting such amendment on the official website of the Secretary of State and on the official website of the General Assembly. Be it further resolved that the clerk of the Senate is directed to deliver copies of this resolution to the Secretary of State, with this final resolving clause being deleted from such copies.
Lear Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that H.J.R. number 13 as amended be set for its second reading on Thursday, April the 20th, 2023.
Without objection, so ordered. Lear Lamberth, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I move to take up item number 15 on calendar 2.
Representative Darby, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move adoption of HJR 81.
Representative Darby moves adoption. Properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, any amendment's been filed?
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Representative Darby, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request the clerk to read HJR 81 for its first reading.
Mr. Clerk, please read the resolution.
House Joint Resolution 81 by Representative Darby on first reading. A resolution to propose an amendment to Article 2, Section 28 of the Constitution of Tennessee to prohibit taxation of property by the state. Whereas Article 2, Section 28 of the Constitution of Tennessee currently authorizes taxation of all property according to its value by any taxing authority, including the state, counties, and municipalities. And whereas the state can impose a property tax, as it did until 1949, to all property in the state. And whereas in 1949, the legislature repealed the state's property tax. And whereas the current property tax is imposed at the local level at various county and municipal tax rates. And whereas the controlling and predominant purpose of the property tax is for local purposes. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the House of Representatives of the 113th General Assembly of the State of Tennessee, the Senate concurring, that a majority of all the members of each house concurring, as shown by the yeas and nays entered on their journals, that it is proposed that Article 2, Section 28 of the Constitution of the State of Tennessee be amended by deleting the following language from the first sentence. In accordance with the following provisions, all property, real, personal, or mixed, shall be subject to taxation, but the legislature, and substituting instead the following. In accordance with the following provisions, all property, real, personal, or mixed, shall be subject to taxation, but the legislature shall not levy, authorize, or otherwise permit any state tax upon such property, and the legislature. Be it further resolved that the foregoing amendment be referred to the 114th General Assembly, and that this resolution proposing such amendment be published in accordance with Article 11, Section 3 of the Constitution of Tennessee by posting such amendment on the official website of the Secretary of State and on the official website of the General Assembly. Be it further resolved that the clerk of the House of Representatives is directed to deliver a copy of this resolution to the Secretary of State, with this final resolving clause being deleted from such copies.
Representative Darby, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that HJR 81 be set for its second reading on Thursday, April the 20th, 2023.
Without objection, so ordered. Call up next one, Mr. Clerk. Lear Lamberth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I make a motion to take up item number 16, calendar number 2.
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you are recognized. Representative Hardaway, for what purpose?
Speaker, maybe I misheard, but did I hear the previous presenter say 2023?
It would be read tomorrow, I believe, which would be 2023. Representative Hardaway?
I thought I heard April 30th, 2023.
Should be April 20, 2023. We can go watch the video and see. We'll get back. Thank you, Representative. All right. Chair Lady, hey, Mr. Clerk.
Speaker, that's House Joint Resolution 94 by Chair Lady Hazelwood, a resolution proposing amendment to Article 1, Section 35 of the Constitution of Tennessee relative to the rights of crime victims.
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move adoption of HJR 0094.
Chair Lady Hazelwood moves adoption. Poppy second. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Holsey, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment restricts the right to reasonable notice to only public proceedings. And with that explanation, I move adoption of House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment 1.
Chairman Holsey moves adoption of amendment number 1, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request the clerk read HJR 94 as amended for its first reading.
Mr. Clerk, please read the resolution.
House Joint Resolution 94 on first reading. A resolution proposing an amendment to Article 1, Section 35 of the Constitution of Tennessee relative to the rights of crime victims. Be it resolved by the House of Representatives of the 113th General Assembly of the State of Tennessee, the Senate concurring, that a majority of all the members of each House concurring, as shown by the yeas and nays entered on their journals, that it is proposed that Article 1, Section 35 of the Constitution of Tennessee be amended by deleting the section in its entirety and substituting the following. Section 35, that to preserve and protect the rights of victims of crime to justice and due process throughout the criminal and juvenile justice systems, a victim as defined by law and which may be expanded by the General Assembly shall have the following rights, which shall be protected. 1, the right to be treated with fairness for the victim's safety and dignity. 2, the right upon request to reasonable notice of all public criminal proceedings and all public juvenile delinquency proceedings involving the accused. 3, the right to present at all public criminal proceedings and all public juvenile delinquency proceedings involving the accused. 4, the right upon request to be heard in any proceeding involving release, plea, sentencing, disposition, and parole, as well as any public proceeding when relevant during which a right of the victim is implicated. 5, the right to be heard and informed of all parole procedures, to participate in the parole process, to provide information to the parole authority, to be considered before the parole of the offender, and to be notified upon request of the parole or other release of the offender. 6, the right to be free from harassment, intimidation, and abuse throughout the criminal justice system, including reasonable protection as defined by the General Assembly from the accused of any person acting on behalf of the accused.
Mr. Clerk. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, I've been informed that I'm committed an error in the reading and I'll have to start from the beginning. I apologize. A resolution proposing an amendment to Article 1, Section 35 of the Constitution of Tennessee relative to the rights of crime victims. Be it resolved by the House of Representatives of the 113th General Assembly of the State of Tennessee, the Senate concurring, that a majority of all members of each House concurring, as shown by the yeas and nays entered on their journals, that it is proposed that Article 1, Section 35 of the Constitution of Tennessee be amended by deleting the section in its entirety and substituting the following. Section 35, that to preserve and protect the rights of victims of crime to justice and due process throughout the criminal and juvenile justice systems, a victim as defined by law and which may be expanded by the General Assembly shall have the following rights, which shall be protected. 1, the right to be treated with fairness from victim's safety, for the victim's safety and dignity. 2, the right upon request to reasonable notice of all public criminal proceedings and all public juvenile delinquency proceedings involving the accused. 3, the right to be present at all public criminal proceedings and all public juvenile delinquency proceedings involving the accused. 4, the right upon request to be heard in any proceeding involving release, plea, sentencing, disposition, and parole, as well as any public proceeding when relevant during which a right of the victim is implicated. 5, the right to be heard and informed of all parole procedures, to participate in the parole process, to provide information to the parole authority, to be considered before the parole of the offender, and to be notified upon request of the parole or other release of the offender. 6, the right to be free from harassment, intimidation, and abuse throughout the criminal justice system, including reasonable protection as defined by the General Assembly from the accused or any person acting on behalf of the accused. 7, the right upon request to reasonable notice of any release, transfer, or escape of the accused or convicted person. 8, the right to fully and timely restitution Mr. Speaker, for correction, 8, the right to full and timely restitution from the offender. 9, the right to a speedy trial or disposition and a prompt and final conclusion of the case after the conviction or sentence. 10, the right to be informed of the minimum sentence the offender will serve in custody and the scheduled release date. 11, the right to have the safety of the victim, the victim's family, and the general public considered before any parole or other post-judgment release decision is made. 12, the right upon request to confer with the prosecution. And 13, the right to be fully informed of all rights afforded to crime victims. A victim may assert the rights enumerated in this section, not as a party, but in the manner further provided by the General Assembly, protecting the victim's right to standing. The General Assembly has the authority to enact substantive and procedural laws to further define, implement, preserve, and protect the rights guaranteed to victims by this section. This section must be interpreted to preserve and protect the rights of all persons to due process. This section, or any law enacted under this section, does not create a basis for vacating a conviction. This section does not restrict the powers of the District Attorney General or the inherent authority of the court. Other than as provided in the preceding paragraph, this section does not create a cause of action or claim for damages against the state or a political subdivision of the state. An officer, employee, or agent of the state or of any of its political subdivisions, or an officer or employee of the court. Be it further resolved that the foregoing be referred to the 114th General Assembly, and that this resolution proposing such amendment be published in accordance with Article 11, Section 3 of the Constitution of Tennessee by posting such amendment on the official website of the Secretary of State and on the official website of the General Assembly. Be it further resolved that the Clerk of the House of Representatives is directed to deliver copies of this resolution to the Secretary of State, with this final resolving clause being deleted from such copies.
Chairlady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is Marcy's Law, and it basically just provides equal rights for crime victims so that they are treated equally as well by our justice system as is the accused. With that, Mr. Speaker, I move that HJR 94 as amended be set for its second reading on Thursday, April 20th, 2023.
Without objection, so ordered. Chairlady Hazelwood.
Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Speaker. When I thanked people before on the staff, when you do that without notes, you're wont to make mistakes, and I did. So I want to, again, thank Jessica Himes, Myrna Tunick, Dakota Gordon, Joel Hayes, Doug Garrett, and Christina Karsner for all their hard work. And, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say that I've been approached by a couple of NASCAR fans, colleagues who have asked me if this checkered flag means that we're at the end. The answer is no, but we are close. Thank you.
Leader Lamberth, can you move this calendar to tomorrow? Right, Mr. Clerk?
Yes, sir. I would make a motion that we take up House Calendar 2, Thursday, August 20th, 2023.
Does that work, Mr. Clerk? If you have Bill on that calendar, good luck to you. Leader Lambert.
That'd be April.
April 20th.
April 20th,
2023.
2023. Representative Hardaway and I are going to take some time after session to compare calendars and get it all straight.
All right. Without objection. We don't have naming time. All right, Mr. Clerk, next order.
Unfinished business.
Unfinished business. We have a couple, so hang on with me. Leader Camper, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that the rules be suspended for immediate introduction and consideration of H.R. 88.
Mr. Clerk, read the caption.
House Resolution 88 by Leader Camper. No, there's a resolution to request that a memorial plaque be affixed in the House chamber to the desk of the late Representative Barbara Cooper.
You've heard the caption. Any objections? Without objections, the rules are suspended. Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move adoption of H.R. 88.
Leader Camper moves adoption of House Resolution 88, probably seconded. Any objection to the question? How about anyone seeking discussion? Leader Camper.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I also want to say, confirm with the leader that all members voted in the affirmative be added as co-prime sponsors with the Shelby delegation listed first.
Without objection, exclusion is duly noted. Anyone, any objection to the question? Seeing none, all those in favor of House Resolution 88 will put it on the board for Ms. Cooper. Vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 97, no nays.
House Joint Resolution receiving constitutional majority, I hereby declare it adopted without objection. Most reconsider is tabled. Representative Powell, for what purpose under unfinished?
Mr. Speaker, I have a parliamentary inquiry. I'm sorry, I was trying to get recognized, if I could. For the clerk, there are several highly consequential bills that are still traveling through this body. Several of us have attempted to file amendments, and I realize we have a deadline of 2 o'clock. My issue is that the bills have yet to be heard in committee. And so because of that, some of us don't serve on that committee, so we cannot file those bills ourselves. So the issue is, and this is very important legislation, and some of us have, these amendments are very important to us, but we're not able to file the bills because there's this 2 p.m. deadline. So my concern is that these bills are going to move at a pace where we're not going to be able to timely file our amendments to where they can be heard on the floor. I myself just had timely filed amendments on a budget. I followed the rules, followed the process. But my fear is we're working at such a pace that members are not going to be able to timely file their bills. So if the clerk can address it, Mr. Speaker, I hope that we can work in a process in fairness so that we have a process for members to be able to timely file bills and that not be forbidden just because we're working at such a rapid pace. But Mr. Clerk, if you could address that, I'd appreciate it.
Representative Powell, just 1 second. Representative Powell, you said bills a couple of times. Do you mean amendments, not bills?
So, that's right. My apologies. I meant specifically amendments that would be added to bills to make sure that we can file our amendments in a timely manner. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, the speed at which we are moving is due to the flow motion. The amendment filing deadline was not included in the flow motion. Therefore, it remains the same as our standard rules.
Representative Powell.
So if a member wanted to file an amendment and it be timely filed, that was not addressed in the flow motion. So therefore, we have very important bills, but we have not looked at this process to make sure that members can file these amendments in a timely process. I've got a major concern with that, and maybe I'll get with the rules and other members to see if there's a way that we can make sure that members can timely file our amendments so that they can be heard on very, again, substantial major legislation that the people of Tennessee are very concerned about. And I know my constituents are interested in me, and I know other members are interested in having their amendments heard in a timely process. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Ritchie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to re-refer House Bill 835 to the House Local Government Committee.
Without objection, so ordered. Lear Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that the rules be suspended for immediate introduction and consideration of House Resolution number 83.
Mr. Clerk, read the caption.
House Resolution 83, by Leader Lambert, the resolution to approve annual events by certain 501c organizations in accordance with the provisions of Article 11, Section 5 of the Constitution of Tennessee and pursuant to the Tennessee Nonprofit Gaming Law.
You've heard the caption. Any objections? Without objection, the rules are suspended. Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move adoption of House Resolution number 83.
Leader Lamberth moves adoption of House Resolution 83. Seconded. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Resolution 83, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Take the vote, Mr. Clerk.
Ayes 97, no nays.
House Resolution 83 having received a vote in the affirmative by 2/3 majorities of the members of the 113th General Assembly, I hereby declare it adopted without objection. The motion reconsiders table. Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to hang on.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just want to make sure there wasn't anything else left. Members, this next one is just a local bill for one of our members that came a little late from their local delegation. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules to introduce HB 1582 and move that it be passed on first consideration.
You've heard the motion. Any objections? Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Announcements.
Announcements. Any announcements? Once, twice. No cell. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Roll call.
Roll call. What do you say? Ms. Clerk, take the roll.
Mr. Speaker, 98 members present.
Next order, Mr. Clerk.
That completes the regular order, Mr. Speaker.
Leader Cochran, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the House stand in recess until 8:30 a.m. on Thursday, April 20th, 2023.
Without objection, the House stands in recess until 8:30 a.m. on Thursday, April 20th, 2023.